Samir Nasri's career reads like a cautionary tale, a roller coaster ride where brilliance and self-destruction coexisted in a way few players have ever managed. He was, at his peak, mesmerizing a player whose every touch carried a kind of artistry that made fans hold their breath. But for every dazzling display of talent, there was an equally spectacular implosion waiting around the corner. He lived in the game and hated it all the same, obsessed with football, yet perpetually disillusioned by it. In many ways, Nasri was the perfect embodiment of contradiction, a genius on the pitch, a chaos merchant off of it, and ultimately a man who seemed to sabotage himself as much as anyone else. It began in Marseille, where even as a child, Nasri was seen as the second coming of Zidane. He had the background, the heritage, the flair, and most importantly, the vision that made him look like a generational player. Scouts were fighting for him before he was even old enough to sign proper papers, and by the time he was 16, he was already part of the famed 1987 generation alongside Hatem Ben Arfa and Karim Benzema. Together, they were tipped to dominate world football for the next decade. Nasri was the crown jewel, scoring decisive goals against Spain's Golden Youth at the European Under-17 Championship. France saw in him not just a prodigy, the answer to their long-term hopes after Zidane. At Marseille, his rise was unstoppable. Managers came and went, but Nasri only grew more influential. He was crowned the Little Prince of the Velodrome, winning Player of the Year at his club and France's Young Player of the Year, while being handed the trophy by Zidane himself. It was a symbolic passing of the torch that seemed to cement his destiny. But destiny, in Nasri's world, was always fragile. An illness, viral meningitis, left him bedridden for nearly 2 weeks at the age of 20. That brush with vulnerability seemed to scar him deeply. Reports from the time suggested it left him disillusioned with the superficial relationships in football. And from then on, a streak of resentment grew in him. He played brilliantly, but there was an edge and anger simmering beneath the surface. Arsene Wenger swooped in as predictably as the sunrise. He saw another French prodigy and placed him into Arsenal's system, promising him stardom. Nasri delivered early, scoring within minutes of his debut and torching Manchester United in front of the Emirates crowd. But while the fans were enthralled, behind the scenes, the trouble was brewing. He clashed almost immediately with William Gallas, Arsenal's captain at the time. Gallas went public with his disdain, labeling Nasri an insolent brat. The feud got so ugly it spilled over to the national team bus, 2 book releases, 2 public spats. Wenger tried to protect Nasri, but the damage was done. He was gaining a reputation as someone who couldn't coexist with authority, who had no respect for hierarchy, and who thrived on controversy. And yet, for every controversy, Nasri delivered flashes of genius. He scored screamers in the Champions League, played like a man possessed during his prime Arsenal run, and even earned comparisons to Maradona. But consistency was always his Achilles heel. For every month of brilliance, there was a slump, where his ego, his attitude, or his lack of discipline dragged him down. When he was snubbed from France's 2010 World Cup squad, he responded with venom, blasting teammates and mocking their disastrous campaign. He played angry, he played desperate, and that fire led him to his best season in an Arsenal shirt. But even then, his ambitions had already outgrown North London. The moment Manchester City came knocking, the writing was on the wall. Wenger accused him of chasing money, Arsenal fans branded him Judas, and Nasri leaned into the role of villain. He justified his move by saying he wanted to win titles, that Arsenal lacked ambition. It was an insult too far for Gunner supporters who had once adored him. He relished their anger, throwing it back at them with sarcastic barbs and on-field taunts. But at City, despite winning 2 Premier League titles, he never became the legend he might have been. He was always a cog, never the heart. His moments of brilliance, like his decisive goals, entitle. Races were overshadowed by his long stretches of indifference internationally. His story was no different. He had the talent to lead France's midfield for a decade, but his behavior turned him into a pariah. He insulted journalists, clashed with coaches, and mocked teammates. The French Football Federation eventually banned him, and by 5 he was already considering walking away from the national team. Even when given second chances, he found ways to burn bridges. For every goal against England, there was an obscene gesture to the camera. For every man of the match display, there was an expletive-laden tirade that undid it all. By his late 20s, the decline had set in. Injuries piled up. Pep Guardiola arrived at Manchester City and immediately dismissed him as overweight and unfit. Sevilla offered him a lifeline, but scandal followed him there too. A bizarre incident at a Los Angeles clinic led to a doping ban after he received an illegal treatment. His girlfriend hijacked his Twitter account during the scandal, humiliating him further, and the media circus once again overshadowed whatever talent he had left. From there, it was a free-fall short stints at Antalyaspor, West Ham, and Anderlecht. None lasting, none salvaging his reputation. And then came the final, cruel chapter. Retirement should have been a time for reflection, for Nasri to be celebrated for his career, for the trophies he won, the goals he scored, the brilliance he brought. Instead, within weeks of announcing his retirement, photos emerged of him unrecognizably out of shape, overweight, and seemingly indifferent to the sport that had defined his life. The man once called the heir to Zidane, the prodigy of Marseille, the tormentor of Manchester United, now looked like someone who had walked away from football years before the official announcement. Samir Nasri was a player who could have been one of the greatest of his generation. The talent was never in question. He had vision, control, agility, and the kind of natural football intelligence that made managers salivate. But he was also his own worst enemy, combative, defiant, and perpetually disillusioned. He fought with captains, with coaches, with teammates, with journalists, and sometimes even with himself. He chased glory, but seemed to resent the game at every turn. In the end, his story wasn't one of unfulfilled potential. Because he did win, he did shine, he did reach heights most players only dream of. His story was something stranger, a man who had it all, and yet never seemed to want it. So when you think of Samir Nasri, don't just think of the prodigy who scored wonder goals, or the star who lifted the Premier League trophy. Think also of the contradictions, the chaos, and the controversies that followed him everywhere he went. He was a genius wrapped in drama, a player who could make you believe in magic one day and shake your head in frustration the next. And maybe, just maybe, that's why his story lingers not as a tale of wasted potential, but as a reminder that talent alone is never enough.